I never imagined that while my 7-year-old daughter lay unconscious on an operating table, fighting for her life after a horrific car accident, my mother-in-law would look the surgeon in the eye and say, "Let her suffer. She's not really family anyway." What she didn't know was that the hospital wing where my daughter was being treated was named after me, and I was about to remind everyone exactly who they were dealing with. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria Ashford, and I'm 34 years old. If you had met me 6 months ago, you would have seen a woman who seemed to have it all together. I lived in the affluent suburb of Willowbrook Heights, just outside Denver, Colorado, in a beautiful colonial home with my husband Nathan and our daughter Lily. From the outside, our life looked picture perfect. Nathan worked as a senior architect at one of the city's most prestigious firms, and I ran my own successful consulting company specializing in healthcare administration. But what most people didn't know was the story behind my success. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. I grew up in a small apartment above my grandmother's bakery in the working-class neighborhood of Riverside. My parents, both immigrants from Ireland, worked multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. My father, Patrick, was a night shift janitor at the city hospital, and my mother, Colleen, cleaned houses during the day and worked at a diner on weekends. When I was 12 years old, my younger brother Aiden was diagnosed with leukemia. I watched my parents drain their savings, sell everything they owned, and go into crushing debt trying to save him. The hospital bills were astronomical, and we were treated like charity cases. I'll never forget sitting in those cold, sterile waiting rooms, watching my mother cry silent tears as she filled out forms for financial assistance, her hands shaking as she tried to prove we were worthy of help. Aiden fought for 3 years, but the cancer won. He was only 14 when he died. At his funeral, I made a promise to myself that no family would ever have to beg for their child's life the way we did. I would make enough money to ensure that healthcare was never a barrier between a sick child and their chance at life. I threw myself into my studies with a fierce determination that surprised everyone around me. I graduated valedictorian from high school, earned a full scholarship to the University of Colorado, and completed my master's degree in healthcare administration while working part-time jobs to support myself. By the time I was 25, I had already started my own consulting firm, helping hospitals streamline their operations and improve patient care. My company, Ashford Healthcare Solutions, grew rapidly. I had a gift for seeing inefficiencies that others missed, and creating systems that saved both money and lives. Within 5 years, I was working with some of the largest hospital networks in the country. The money started flowing in, more than I had ever dreamed possible. But success came with a price. The long hours, the constant travel, and the pressure to always be on took its toll. I was making 7 figures annually, but I was also working 16-hour days and hadn't taken a real vacation in years. I was so focused on building my empire that I almost forgot why I started in the first place. Then I met Nathan at a charity gala for the Children's Hospital of Colorado. He was there because his firm had designed their new pediatric wing, and I was there because I had just made a substantial donation. We struck up a conversation about the importance of creating healing environments for children, and I was immediately drawn to his passion for making spaces that brought comfort to families during their darkest moments. Nathan was different from the men I usually dated. He wasn't impressed by my money or my success. He was interested in my story, my motivations, my dreams for the future. He listened when I told him about Aiden, about the promise I had made, about the guilt I carried for surviving when my brother didn't. He didn't try to fix me or tell me I was being too hard on myself. He just held my hand and said, "Aiden would be proud of who you've become." We were married 2 years later in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens, with only close friends and family in attendance. Nathan's parents, Harold and Evelyn Ashford, had flown in from their estate in Connecticut. From the moment I met them, I knew they disapproved of their son's choice. They were old money, the kind of family that traced their lineage back to the Mayflower and believed that breeding and bloodlines mattered more than character or accomplishments. Evelyn, in particular, made her feelings known with subtle but cutting remarks. She would comment on my nouveau riche lifestyle, my aggressive business practices, and my unconventional background. She never said anything overtly cruel. She was too well-bred for that. But her disapproval hung in the air like expensive perfume, impossible to ignore. Harold was more direct in his disdain. He questioned whether I was suitable for their family name, and made it clear that he believed Nathan was marrying beneath his station. At our rehearsal dinner, he pulled me aside and suggested that perhaps a prenuptial agreement would be prudent given my complicated financial situation. I politely declined, knowing that my assets far exceeded anything the Ashford family had to offer. When Lily was born 3 years ago, I thought things might change. Surely, I reasoned, they would soften toward their only grandchild. And they did seem to dote on Lily, when it was convenient for them. They would send expensive gifts from Europe, visit for carefully orchestrated photo opportunities, and take her to exclusive events where they could show off their beautiful granddaughter to their society friends. But their love for Lily always came with conditions and criticism. They complained that I was raising her to be too independent, that I worked too much, that I was a helicopter parent who couldn't let go. When I enrolled Lily in public school instead of the private academy they recommended, Evelyn actually gasped and said, "Darling, what will people think?" Nathan tried to be the buffer between his family and me, but he was caught in an impossible position. He loved his parents and wanted their approval, but he also loved me and Lily, and wanted to protect us from their judgment. We had developed a routine of limited contact, holiday visits, birthday calls, and the occasional family gathering where we all pretended to get along for the sake of appearances. That's where our lives stood on that crisp October morning when everything changed. I was in my home office, reviewing contracts for a new hospital system in Phoenix, when Nathan called from his construction site. His voice was tight with panic as he told me there had been an accident. Lily had been walking to her friend Emma's house after school when a distracted driver ran a red light and struck her in the crosswalk. She was unconscious and being rushed to Denver General Hospital, the same hospital where my father had worked as a janitor all those years ago, the same hospital where Aiden had spent his final days. As I raced through the city streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, I had no idea that this tragedy would expose the true nature of my husband's family. I had no idea that in the next few hours I would witness cruelty so profound it would change everything I thought I knew about the people who shared my daughter's blood. And I certainly had no idea that the Victoria Ashford Memorial Wing, named in honor of my brother Aiden and funded by my success, would become the stage for a confrontation that would redefine what family really means. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Ashford family had perfected the art of making me feel like an outsider wrapped in the guise of polite acceptance. It took me years to understand that their cruelty wasn't random. It was systematic, calculated, and designed to remind me that no matter how successful I became, I would never truly belong in their world. The pattern started almost immediately after Nathan and I announced our engagement. We had been dating for 8 months when he proposed during a weekend getaway to Aspen. It was perfect, intimate, thoughtful, and exactly the kind of moment I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. Nathan had arranged for a private dinner on the mountain, complete with twinkling lights and a view that took my breath away. When he got down on one knee and pulled out his grandmother's antique emerald ring, I cried tears of pure joy. But when we returned to Denver and called his parents to share the news, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. There was a long pause on the phone before Evelyn's carefully modulated voice responded, "How wonderful, darling. We'll need to discuss the arrangements, of course." What followed was 6 months of wedding planning that felt more like a military campaign than a celebration of love. Evelyn took control immediately, dismissing every idea I had as quaint or inappropriate for the family's reputation. She wanted the ceremony at the Broadmoor Hotel, a sprawling resort in Colorado Springs that would accommodate their extensive guest list of society friends and business associates. I wanted something smaller, more intimate, perhaps at the Denver Botanic Gardens where Nathan and I had shared our first official date. "Victoria, dear," Evelyn said during one particularly tense planning session, her voice dripping with condescension. "I understand you're not familiar with how these things are done in proper families, but weddings aren't just about the couple. They're about maintaining social standing and business relationships." When I suggested that perhaps we could compromise and have a smaller ceremony followed by a larger reception, Harold actually laughed, and said, "That's adorable. You really don't understand how this works, do you?" The final straw came when they insisted on rewriting our guest list. I had invited my parents, of course, along with my surviving aunts and uncles, my college roommates, and colleagues from work. Evelyn took one look at the list and made a face like she had tasted something sour. "We'll need to be more selective," she announced. "The Ashford family has certain standards to maintain." When I asked what she meant, she explained that my father's job as a hospital janitor and my mother's work cleaning houses might make their friends uncomfortable. She suggested that perhaps my parents could attend the ceremony but skip the reception, or maybe we could have a separate, smaller gathering for my people the following weekend. That was the moment I realized I wasn't marrying into a family. I was being absorbed into an institution that viewed love as secondary to appearances. Nathan, to his credit, stood up for me when I told him what his mother had suggested. We had our first real fight about it, voices raised in his downtown loft as I accused his family of being elitist snobs, and he defended their traditions. But in the end, love won. We compromised on a medium-sized wedding at the Four Seasons, with both families represented equally. My parents wore their Sunday best and held their heads high, while Harold and Evelyn smiled tightly for the photographer and made small talk with my relatives as if they were performing community service. The real problems started after Lily was born. Suddenly, the Ashfords had opinions about everything: how I fed her, how I dressed her, where I took her, and especially how much time I spent at work. Evelyn would arrive for unannounced visits, usually when Nathan was traveling for work, and critique my parenting with the precision of a surgeon. "Breast milk is so pedestrian," she said during one visit when Lily was just 3 months old. "Formula is much more convenient and, frankly, more sanitary. You never know what toxins you might be passing along." When Lily started walking, Evelyn criticized my choice to baby-proof the house. "You're creating a bubble around that child," she declared, watching as I secured cabinet locks and outlet covers. "How will she ever learn to navigate the real world if you remove every possible danger?" But it was my work that really bothered them. Despite the fact that my consulting firm was bringing in more money than Nathan's architectural practice, they viewed my career as an unfortunate necessity rather than an achievement to be celebrated. Harold would make jokes about lady bosses and women who forgot their place, while Evelyn would sigh dramatically and say things like, "I suppose modern women feel they need to prove themselves in the workplace." The criticism extended to how I spent my money, particularly my charitable giving. After Aiden's death, I had established a foundation that provided financial assistance to families dealing with childhood cancer. Every year, I donated a significant portion of my income to various children's hospitals and medical research organizations. To me, this wasn't charity. It was a sacred obligation, a way of honoring my brother's memory and fulfilling the promise I had made at his funeral. But the Ashfords saw it differently. During a family dinner last Christmas, Harold made a comment that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. "Victoria's quite generous with her donations," he said, cutting into his prime rib with surgical precision. "Though I do think there's wisdom in being more strategic about one's philanthropy. Supporting the arts, for instance, or educational institutions that benefit one's own social circle." When I explained that my giving was deeply personal and connected to my brother's memory, Evelyn actually rolled her eyes. "Of course, dear. But surely you've grieved long enough? It's been over 20 years. Perhaps it's time to move on and focus on more appropriate causes. I felt Nathan's hand find mine under the table, squeezing gently as he tried to diffuse the tension. But the damage was done. They had just dismissed my brother's life, my family's tragedy, and my life's work as inappropriate and excessive grief. The pattern became clear. Anything that connected me to my working-class roots, my family's struggles, or my independent success was somehow shameful and needed to be corrected or hidden. They wanted me to transform into their version of the perfect daughter-in-law, quiet, decorative, dependent on their approval and Nathan's income. Last summer, the tension reached a new level when I was featured on the cover of Denver Business Journal as Healthcare Innovator of the Year. The article detailed my company's success and highlighted my philanthropic work, including a substantial donation that had funded the new pediatric surgery wing at Denver General Hospital. I was proud of the recognition, not for the attention, but because it meant more families would have access to the kind of care that might have saved Aiden. When the magazine came out, I excitedly called Nathan to share the news. He was thrilled, of course, and promised to pick up several copies on his way home from work. But when his parents saw the article, their reaction was swift and cutting. Evelyn called that evening, ostensibly to congratulate me, but her true feelings became clear within minutes. "It's wonderful that you're getting recognition for your work, dear," she said in that syrupy tone that always preceded criticism. "Though I do worry about all this public attention. The Ashford family has always preferred to keep our charitable works private. We believe in quiet dignity rather than publicity." Harold was even more direct during our next family gathering. "I hope you're not planning to make a habit of this media attention," he said, gesturing toward the framed magazine cover that Nathan had hung in our living room. "It sends the wrong message about our family's values." When I asked what message that might be, he smiled coldly. "That we're the type of people who need public recognition for doing what should come naturally to those with means." The irony, of course, was that Harold and Evelyn's own charitable giving was minimal and entirely focused on tax benefits and social climbing. They attended galas and had their names printed in programs, but I had never seen them write a check that actually challenged their lifestyle or comfort. But the most painful pattern was how they treated Lily. They loved her, in their way, but it was a conditional love that came with constant criticism of how Nathan and I were raising her. They complained that we were too permissive, too protective, too focused on her happiness rather than her character development. "That child is being raised like a little princess," Evelyn would say, watching Lily play in our backyard. "She needs more discipline, more structure. You're setting her up for disappointment when she discovers the world doesn't revolve around her." When Lily started showing an interest in art, drawing pictures and painting with the watercolor set my parents had given her for her birthday, Harold made a comment that revealed everything about his worldview. "Artistic pursuits are fine as hobbies," he said, examining one of Lily's paintings with the expression of someone inspecting a mild curiosity. "But it's important not to encourage unrealistic expectations. Not everyone can be an artist, and it's cruel to let children believe otherwise." The pattern was clear: diminish, control, and reshape everything that didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. They had spent 4 years trying to turn me into their ideal daughter-in-law, and now they were starting on Lily, attempting to mold her into their version of the perfect granddaughter. As I raced toward the hospital that October afternoon, my mind flashing back to all these moments of subtle and not-so-subtle cruelty, I had no idea that their true nature was about to be revealed in the most shocking way possible. I thought I had seen the worst of Harold and Evelyn Ashford. I was wrong. The phone call came at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. I was in the middle of reviewing budget projections for a new children's hospital in Phoenix when Nathan's name flashed across my phone screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. We had a rule about not interrupting each other during work hours unless it was truly urgent. Something in my gut told me to answer. "Victoria," his voice was shattered, barely recognizable. "There's been an accident." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of my desk, my carefully organized reports suddenly meaningless. What kind of accident? Where are you? It's Lily. The line crackled with static, and I could hear sirens wailing in the background. She was walking to Emma's house after school. A driver ran the red light at Maple and Fifth. She's unconscious, Victoria. They're taking her to Denver General. My world tilted sideways. Denver General. The hospital where my father had mopped floors for 20 years, where Aiden had fought his last battle, where I had sworn I would never set foot again after watching my family beg for scraps of hope. The hospital that now bore my name on its newest wing. How bad? I managed to whisper, already grabbing my purse and keys with shaking hands. I don't know. The paramedics won't tell me anything. She hasn't woken up since. His voice broke completely. Just get here, please. I don't remember the drive to the hospital. One moment I was in my office, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my success, and the next I was running through the emergency room doors, my heels clicking against the polished linoleum floors that my father had cleaned with such pride all those years ago. Nathan was pacing in the waiting area, his usually pristine clothes wrinkled and stained with what looked like blood. When he saw me, he collapsed into my arms, and I felt his tears soak through my silk blouse. They took her straight to surgery, he said against my shoulder. Dr. Reynolds is operating. Head trauma, possible internal bleeding. They said it was touch and go. Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds. I knew that name. She was the head of pediatric neurosurgery, one of the best in the country. If anyone could save Lily, it would be her. But the fact that they had called in the department head meant the situation was grave. Where did it happen? I asked, trying to focus on details, on facts, on anything that would keep the panic at bay. Right in front of the Hendersons' house. You know, the blue one with the big oak tree? She was crossing the street when some guy in a BMW He didn't even stop, Victoria. He ran the light going at least 50 and hit her like she was nothing. I closed my eyes, picturing the intersection where we had walked so many times together. Lily holding my hand, chattering about her day at school, skipping along the sidewalk without a care in the world. How could something so ordinary, so routine, turn into this nightmare? Did they catch him? I asked. Nathan nodded grimly. Car was totaled too. Driver was texting, completely oblivious. 23 years old, no major injuries. Lily gets the life-threatening trauma, and he walks away with a scratch. The injustice of it made my stomach churn. A young man's moment of carelessness, a split second of choosing his phone over the road, and now my 7-year-old daughter was fighting for her life on an operating table. We had been sitting in that sterile waiting room for about an hour when they arrived. I heard Evelyn's voice first, that distinctive patrician tone that could cut through any crowd. She was speaking to someone at the nurse's station, no doubt demanding special treatment and immediate updates. We're here for our granddaughter, she was saying, her voice carrying that familiar note of entitled authority. Lily Ashford. She was brought in earlier today. Harold appeared beside her, immaculately dressed as always, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the circumstances. Even in a family crisis, appearances mattered to the Ashfords. Behind them walked their longtime friend and personal physician, Dr. Morgan Whitfield, a distinguished man in his 60s, whom they had probably called in as their own medical consultant. Nathan stood to greet them, and I watched as Evelyn embraced him with the kind of dramatic flair she reserved for moments when others were watching. Harold clapped him on the shoulder with what was meant to look like paternal support, but came across as stiff and performative. Then they turned to me. Evelyn's perfectly made-up face was arranged in an expression of concern, but her eyes were calculating, assessing, already looking for ways to take control of the situation. "Victoria, darling," she said, air-kissing near my cheek without actually making contact. "This is absolutely dreadful. How are you holding up?" Before I could answer, she was already moving past me, approaching the nurse's station with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. "Excuse me," she called out to the head nurse. I need to speak with whoever is in charge of my granddaughter's care immediately. The nurse, a kind-faced woman named Janet, whom I recognized from previous visits to the hospital, looked up with professional patience. Are you family members? We're the grandparents, Harold announced, as if this should immediately grant them access to all information and decision-making authority. Harold and Evelyn Ashford. Our granddaughter Lily was brought in this afternoon. Janet glanced over at Nathan and me, clearly trying to determine the family hierarchy. Nathan stepped forward, his arm around my waist in a gesture of solidarity. These are my parents, he explained. Victoria and I are Lily's parents. We've been here since she arrived. That's when Dr. Whitfield inserted himself into the conversation. I'm Dr. Morgan Whitfield, he announced to Janet, pulling out his medical credentials. I've been the Ashford family physician for over 20 years. I'd like to consult with the attending physician regarding Lily's care. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was exactly what I had been afraid of. Harold and Evelyn swooping in and trying to take control of a situation that was fundamentally about Nathan, Lily, and me. Dr. Whitfield was a perfectly competent internal medicine physician, but he had no expertise in pediatric neurosurgery. His presence here was purely about the Ashfords asserting their authority. I appreciate your concern, I said, stepping forward and addressing Dr. Whitfield directly, but Lily already has the best possible care. Dr. Reynolds is operating, and she's one of the top pediatric neurosurgeons in the country. Evelyn's eyebrows rose slightly. Of course, dear, but it never hurts to have multiple medical opinions, especially in a situation this serious. Dr. Whitfield has connections at some excellent private facilities that might be better equipped. No, the word came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Lily is staying here. This hospital has everything she needs. Harold stepped forward, his expression darkening. Victoria, I understand you're emotional right now, but this isn't the time for stubbornness. If there are better options available— There aren't, I interrupted. Denver General has the best pediatric trauma center in the state. Dr. Reynolds has saved hundreds of children with injuries just like Lily's. She's exactly where she needs to be. What I didn't say, what I couldn't say without revealing information I wasn't ready to share, was that I knew this hospital better than they could possibly imagine. I knew every department head, every piece of equipment, every protocol. I had personally funded much of the technology that was currently being used to save my daughter's life. Evelyn's smile became more forced. Well, of course you know best, darling. I'm sure everything will be fine. Though I do think we should consider transferring her to Presbyterian St. Joseph, where the Ashford family has been donors for decades. They know how to treat our kind of people properly. Our kind of people? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Nathan sensed the tension escalating and tried to intervene. Mom, Dad, why don't we all just sit down and wait for news from Dr. Reynolds? That's what matters right now. But Harold wasn't finished. Nathan, your mother and I have experience with these situations. We know how important it is to ensure that Lily receives the highest level of care possible. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions quickly, before emotion clouds our judgment. The implication was clear. They believed Nathan and I were too emotional to make rational decisions about our own daughter's care. They saw us as hysterical parents who needed their steady, rational guidance to navigate this crisis. That's when Dr. Whitfield made his first move. I'd like to review Lily's medical records and speak with her surgical team, he announced to the nurse's station. As a consulting physician for the family. I'm sorry, Janet replied professionally, but medical records can only be shared with parents or legal guardians unless they specifically authorize additional access. Evelyn's mask slipped slightly. Surely there's some flexibility here. We're not strangers. We're her grandparents, and Dr. Whitfield is our family physician. The rules are the rules, Janet said firmly, but kindly. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford would need to sign a release form authorizing Dr. Whitfield to receive medical information. All eyes turned to Nathan and me. I could feel the weight of their expectations, their assumption that we would naturally defer to their wishes and their supposed expertise. After all, they were the Ashfords. They were used to getting their way, especially when it came to overruling me. Nathan looked at me, a question in his eyes. I knew he was torn between not wanting to offend his parents and supporting my instincts about our daughter's care. This was the moment when we would either stand together as Lily's parents or allow his family to drive a wedge between us when we needed each other most. "No," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the waiting room. "Dr. Whitfield will not be consulting on Lily's case. Dr. Reynolds and her team have our complete confidence." The silence that followed was deafening. Harold's face flushed red. Evelyn's mouth formed a perfect O of shock, and Dr. Whitfield looked genuinely taken aback. They had expected compliance, submission, gratitude for their intervention. Instead, they had encountered a mother's fierce protection of her child. That was the moment everything changed. That was when the Ashfords realized that this crisis would not be an opportunity for them to demonstrate their superiority and take control. It would be a test of exactly how far they were willing to go to assert their dominance over our family. And as we would soon discover, there was no limit to how low they would sink. The tension in the waiting room was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. After my refusal to allow Dr. Whitfield access to Lily's medical records, Harold and Evelyn had retreated to chairs on the opposite side of the room, speaking in hushed, urgent whispers with their family physician. Every few minutes, one of them would glance in my direction with barely concealed disapproval. Nathan sat beside me, his leg bouncing nervously as he checked his phone for the 100th time. "Still no word from Dr. Reynolds," he murmured. "It's been 3 hours." I squeezed his hand, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "Brain surgery takes time. She's being thorough, making sure everything is perfect." But inside, I was dying. Every minute that passed without news felt like an eternity. I kept thinking about Lily's laugh, the way she wrinkled her nose when she was concentrating on her homework, how she insisted on kissing both Nathan and me goodnight every single evening. The thought that I might never hear that laugh again made it difficult to breathe. That's when I noticed the commotion at the nurse's station. Evelyn had returned, but this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a tall, imposing woman in an expensive tailored suit, someone I didn't recognize, but who clearly commanded attention. "This is Catherine Mansfield," Evelyn was saying to Janet, the head nurse. "She's the director of patient services at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital." Catherine stepped forward with the kind of authoritative presence that came from years of managing healthcare systems. "I understand there's been a pediatric trauma case involving the Ashford family. I wanted to offer our services and discuss potential transfer options." My stomach dropped. They had actually called in a hospital administrator from their preferred facility. This wasn't just about getting Dr. Whitfield access to Lily's records anymore. They were actively trying to move my daughter to a different hospital while she was in surgery. I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped against the floor. "Excuse me," I said, approaching the group at the nurse's station. "What exactly is going on here?" Catherine turned to me with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be Victoria. I'm so sorry about your daughter's accident. I wanted to personally assure you that Presbyterian St. Joseph has the finest pediatric facilities in the region. We've already arranged for a room in our VIP wing and spoken with our head of neurosurgery about accepting the case." "Lily is already in surgery," I said, struggling to keep my voice level, "with Dr. Reynolds, who is an excellent surgeon." "Of course," Catherine replied smoothly, "but post-surgical care is just as important as the initial procedure. Our facility offers private rooms, specialized nursing care, and amenities that simply aren't available in public hospitals." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. She was talking about Denver General, a hospital that saved thousands of lives every year, as if it were some kind of second-rate clinic. What she didn't know was that I had personally overseen the renovation of their pediatric wing, that I had donated the latest surgical equipment, that I probably knew more about this hospital's capabilities than she knew about her own. Harold stepped forward, clearly pleased with this development. We've taken the liberty of arranging ambulance transport for after the surgery. Presbyterian St. Joseph is much better suited for Lily's recovery. No, the word came out flat and final. Lily is not being transferred anywhere. Evelyn's mask of concern finally began to slip. Victoria, darling, I understand this is difficult, but you're not thinking clearly. The Ashford family has been donors to Presbyterian St. Joseph for generations. They know us there. They'll take special care of Lily. She's getting special care here, I replied, from one of the best pediatric neurosurgeons in the country. Catherine consulted the tablet in her hands. I've reviewed Dr. Reynolds' credentials, and while she's certainly competent, our Dr. Harrison has 15 years more experience and has pioneered several innovative techniques in pediatric brain surgery. That was when I knew they had done their homework and gotten it completely wrong. Dr. Reynolds had trained under Dr. Harrison early in her career, but had long since surpassed her mentor's abilities. More importantly, she was intimately familiar with the equipment and support systems at Denver General, having helped design many of them. Dr. Reynolds is staying on the case, I said firmly, and Lily is staying here. Nathan had joined us at the nurse's station, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. Mom, Dad, I think we should let Victoria and me make these decisions. We're her parents. But Harold wasn't backing down. Son, you're both too emotional to think rationally right now. This is exactly when family needs to step in and provide guidance. Guidance? I repeated, my voice rising slightly. Or control? Evelyn placed a manicured hand on my arm, her touch feeling more like a restraint than comfort. No one is trying to control anything, dear. We simply want what's best for our granddaughter. And sometimes what's best isn't what feels right in the moment. That's when Dr. Whitfield decided to insert himself back into the conversation. From a medical perspective, he said, addressing Nathan rather than me, there are legitimate concerns about continuing care at a public facility. Presbyterian St. Joseph has better staff-to-patient ratios, more advanced monitoring equipment, and frankly, a more controlled environment. I felt my temper flare. More controlled environment? What exactly does that mean? Well, Dr. Whitfield said carefully, public hospitals tend to see a more diverse patient population. There can be complications with infection control, noise levels, and general disruptions that might impede recovery. The racist undertones weren't even subtle. He was essentially saying that Lily would be safer in a hospital that served primarily wealthy, white patients rather than the diverse community that Denver General had proudly served for decades. That's enough, I said, my voice deadly quiet. Dr. Whitfield, your services are not needed here. And Mrs. Mansfield, I appreciate your offer, but Lily will be recovering exactly where she is. Catherine's professional facade began to crack. I'm afraid I don't understand your hostility, Mrs. Ashford. We're simply trying to ensure your daughter receives the best possible care. No, I replied. You're trying to override the medical decisions of her parents because you think we're not sophisticated enough to know what's best for our own child. Harold's face flushed red. That's not what this is about, and you know it. Then what is it about? I challenged him. The waiting room had grown quiet, other families pretending not to listen to the increasingly heated exchange happening near the nurse's station. Even Janet was looking uncomfortable, clearly unsure whether she should intervene or call security. Evelyn stepped closer to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than if she had shouted. It's about making sure Lily grows up to understand the importance of family loyalty and respect for those who know better than she does. The words hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just talking about medical decisions. She was talking about using Lily's vulnerable state to establish control over our entire family dynamic. This crisis, in her mind, was an opportunity to prove that Nathan and I couldn't handle serious situations without their intervention. Family loyalty, I repeated slowly. You mean the kind of loyalty that involves calling in outside administrators to override the wishes of a child's parents while she's fighting for her life in surgery? Dr. Whitfield cleared his throat. Perhaps we could table this discussion until after we have more information about Lily's condition. The stress of the situation is clearly affecting everyone's judgment. That condescending comment was the final straw. My judgment is perfectly clear, I said, turning to face all of them. Lily stays here, with Dr. Reynolds under the care of this hospital's medical team. Anyone who has a problem with that decision is welcome to leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Harold's jaw worked as if he were chewing on words too bitter to swallow. Evelyn's eyes had gone cold and calculating, the way they always did when someone dared to challenge her authority. Catherine clutched her tablet like a shield, clearly regretting getting involved in what was obviously a family power struggle. Nathan stepped closer to me, his hand finding mine. "Victoria's right," he said quietly. "Lily stays here." For a moment, I thought they might actually back down. Harold glanced at Evelyn, some silent communication passing between them. Dr. Whitfield shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to escape the increasingly awkward situation. But then Evelyn smiled, a cold, predatory expression that I had seen before but never directed at me with such naked hostility. "Of course, darling," she said sweetly. "We only want what's best for Lily. I'm sure you'll make the right decisions." The words were perfectly reasonable, even supportive. But something in her tone made my skin crawl. This wasn't surrender, it was strategy. She was regrouping, planning her next move. As Catherine and Dr. Whitfield made their excuses and departed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just won a battle while losing sight of the larger war. The Ashfords had revealed their true intentions. They saw Lily's crisis as an opportunity to establish their dominance over our family once and for all. But they had also revealed something else. They had drastically underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. They saw me as an outsider, someone who could be intimidated and controlled through their wealth and connections. What they didn't know, what they were about to discover in the most shocking way possible, was that they had chosen the wrong hospital and the wrong woman to try to intimidate. As I sat back down to wait for news about my daughter's surgery, I had no idea that in the next few hours, the Ashfords would show me just how far they were willing to go to assert their control. And I had no idea that their cruelty would soon expose them to consequences they never could have imagined. It was just after 7 p.m. when Dr. Reynolds finally emerged from the surgical wing, still wearing her scrubs, exhaustion etched across her face. My heart hammered as I watched her scan the waiting room, her expression unreadable. Nathan and I shot to our feet simultaneously, while Harold and Evelyn rose more slowly, their movements deliberate and controlled. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford?" Dr. Reynolds called out, and we hurried toward her. "The surgery went well. We were able to relieve the pressure on Lily's brain and repair the internal bleeding. She's stable, but the next 24 hours will be critical." Relief flooded through me so powerfully that my knees nearly buckled. Nathan's arm went around my waist, steadying me as tears streamed down my face. "Can we see her?" I managed to ask. "She's being moved to the pediatric ICU now. You can see her in about 30 minutes, but she's still unconscious. The anesthesia will take several hours to wear off completely." Dr. Reynolds' voice was professional but kind. "I want to be clear, she's not out of the woods yet. Brain injuries are unpredictable, especially in children. We'll be monitoring her closely for any signs of complications." Harold stepped forward, his imposing presence immediately commandeering the conversation. "Doctor, we appreciate your work, but we need to discuss transferring Lily to Presbyterian St. Joseph for her recovery. We've already made arrangements." "Absolutely not," Dr. Reynolds interrupted, her tone sharp. "Moving a patient with a traumatic brain injury within the first 48 hours is extremely dangerous. Lily needs to remain here, where we can monitor her continuously." Evelyn moved to Harold's side, presenting a united front. "Dr. Reynolds, with all due respect, We've consulted with other medical professionals who believe Lily would receive superior post-operative care at Presbyterian. Surely you can understand our desire to give our granddaughter every possible advantage." I watched Dr. Reynolds's jaw tighten slightly. She had clearly dealt with wealthy families trying to override medical decisions before. "Mrs. Ashford, I've been performing pediatric neurosurgery for 15 years. Moving Lily right now could cause brain swelling, seizures, or worse. She's staying here." That's when Harold made his first real tactical error. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts. "I'm calling the hospital board," he announced. "I'm sure they'll be interested to know that one of their surgeons is refusing to cooperate with a family's reasonable requests." Dr. Reynolds' eyebrows shot up. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Ashford?" "I'm ensuring that my granddaughter receives appropriate care," Harold replied coldly. "The Ashford family has significant influence in this city's medical community. It would be wise to remember that." I felt something snap inside me. The exhaustion, the fear, the hours of watching them try to undermine every decision Nathan and I made. It all crystallized into a white-hot fury that I could no longer contain. "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Harold, put the phone away. Dr. Reynolds, thank you for saving my daughter's life. Lily will remain here under your care." Harold's face darkened. "Victoria, you're overwrought. You're not thinking clearly about what's best for." "What's best for Lily," I interrupted, "is having her mother make decisions about her care, not her grandfather's ego." The waiting room had gone silent. Other families were now openly staring at our group, drawn by the escalating volume and obvious conflict. Harold's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while Evelyn's expression had shifted from concerned grandmother to something much more calculating and cold. "How dare you," Harold said, his voice low and dangerous. "How dare you question my concern for my granddaughter? The Ashford family has been part of this community for generations. We know how things work here, we know who the best doctors are, and we know what quality care looks like." "And I don't?" I shot back. "Because I didn't grow up with money? Because my father cleaned floors instead of owning buildings?" Evelyn stepped forward, her voice honey-sweet but venomous. "Darling, no one is questioning your background, but surely you can see that this is bigger than your personal feelings. Lily's future is at stake." "My personal feelings?" I repeated, incredulous. "My personal feelings about my daughter's medical care?" That's when Nathan tried to intervene. "Mom, Dad, please, Victoria and I need to focus on Lily right now. Can we table this discussion until—" "No," Harold cut him off sharply. "Nathan, your wife is making decisions based on pride and stubbornness, not medical facts. Someone needs to be the adult here." The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. After everything we had been through that day, Lily's accident, the surgery, the uncertainty, he was treating me like a hysterical child who couldn't be trusted with important decisions. But it was Evelyn's next words that revealed the true depth of their contempt. "Victoria, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I understand that you feel the need to prove something. You've always been so defensive about your place in this family. But this isn't about you. This is about what's best for Lily. And sometimes that means accepting help from people who know better." The waiting room went dead silent. Even Dr. Reynolds looked shocked by the casual cruelty of the comment. Evelyn had just accused me in front of witnesses of putting my own ego ahead of my daughter's welfare. "Know better?" I repeated, my voice deadly quiet. "You think you know better than Lily's mother about what she needs?" Harold nodded firmly. "Yes, frankly we do. We have experience, resources, and connections that you simply don't possess. This isn't personal, Victoria. It's practical." That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I turned to Dr. Reynolds, who was watching the exchange with growing concern. "Doctor, could you please explain to my in-laws exactly what kind of facility they're standing in right now?" Dr. Reynolds looked confused. I'm not sure I understand. The pediatric wing? I continued, my voice gaining strength. Could you tell them about the equipment, the success rates, the level of care provided here? Well, Dr. Reynolds began slowly. Denver General has one of the most advanced pediatric trauma centers in the region. Our success rates for traumatic brain injuries are among the highest in the country. The equipment in our OR is state-of-the-art, and our ICU monitoring systems are the most sophisticated available. Harold waved dismissively. I'm sure it's adequate, but Presbyterian St. Joseph has been serving families like ours for decades. They understand the level of service we expect. Service? Dr. Reynolds repeated, her professional composure beginning to crack. Mr. Ashford, this is a hospital, not a hotel. We're talking about your granddaughter's life, not your comfort level. Evelyn's eyes flashed with anger. Dr. Reynolds? I think you're forgetting that families like ours have choices. We don't have to accept substandard care just because it's convenient. That was the moment I realized they had pushed too far. They had insulted not just me, but Dr. Reynolds, the hospital staff, and by extension, every family who couldn't afford their superior facilities. They had revealed themselves completely, their classism, their entitlement, their fundamental belief that money should determine who deserved quality medical care. Substandard care? I repeated, my voice rising. You think the hospital that just saved your granddaughter's life provides substandard care? Harold stepped closer to me, his voice threatening. Victoria, you need to calm down. Your hysteria is embarrassing, and it's not helping anyone. Nathan moved between us, his face pale but determined. Dad, that's enough. You need to apologize to my wife. Apologize? Harold laughed bitterly. For trying to ensure that Lily gets the best possible treatment? For caring more about her welfare than Victoria's wounded pride? That's when Evelyn delivered the killing blow. Nathan, darling, she said, her voice soft but carrying clearly across the waiting room, perhaps it's time to consider whether Victoria is really equipped to make these kinds of decisions. She's obviously overwhelmed, and her judgment seems compromised. Maybe it would be better if you took the lead on Lily's care. The suggestion hung in the air like poison gas. She was essentially arguing that Nathan should override my parental authority because I was too emotional and compromised to be trusted with our daughter's welfare. I stared at her, finally understanding the full scope of what they were trying to do. This wasn't just about moving Lily to a different hospital. This was about establishing a new hierarchy in our family, with them at the top and me firmly at the bottom. They wanted to use my daughter's trauma as leverage to put me in my place once and for all. Nathan's response would determine everything, whether we stood together as parents or whether his family's manipulation would finally succeed in dividing us when our daughter needed us most. The waiting room held its breath as we all turned to look at him, waiting to see which side he would choose. Nathan stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, his eyes moving between his parents and me. I could see the war playing out on his face. Loyalty to the family that raised him versus loyalty to the family he had chosen to build with me. The entire waiting room seemed to hold its breath, sensing that something fundamental was about to shift. No, he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. Victoria is Lily's mother. Every decision about her care goes through both of us, together. That's not negotiable. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I nearly collapsed. Harold's face turned an even deeper shade of red, while Evelyn's mask of concern finally cracked completely, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. Nathan, Harold said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage, you're making a mistake. You're letting your wife's emotional instability cloud your judgment about what's best for your daughter. My judgment is fine, Nathan replied, moving closer to me in a gesture of unmistakable solidarity. And so is Victoria's. We're Lily's parents, and we're making the decisions that we believe are in her best interest. Dr. Reynolds, who had been watching this family drama unfold with growing discomfort, cleared her throat. I'm going to check on Lily's transfer to the ICU. You should be able to see her within the hour. As she walked away, I could see other families in the waiting room quickly averting their eyes, pretending they hadn't just witnessed our very public family meltdown. The embarrassment was secondary to my fury, but I could feel my cheeks burning nonetheless. That's when the elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and everything got worse. "Oh my God, what happened? Is Lily okay? Why didn't anyone call me sooner?" The voice belonged to Nathan's younger sister, Caroline, who came rushing across the waiting room in a whirlwind of designer clothes and expensive perfume. At 28, Caroline was the baby of the family and had never quite grown out of the role. She worked as a curator at a prestigious art gallery in downtown Denver, a job that had been arranged through family connections and funded by her parents' continued financial support. Caroline embodied everything the Ashfords valued. She was beautiful, cultured, appropriately married to a corporate lawyer named James, and completely dependent on her parents' approval and financial backing. She had never challenged them, never questioned their authority, and never failed to support their version of family hierarchy. "Caroline, thank goodness you're here," Evelyn said, immediately moving to embrace her daughter. "Lily was in a terrible accident, but she's stable now. Unfortunately, Victoria is being difficult about her medical care." I watched Caroline's expression shift as she processed this information. Her eyes moved to Nathan and me, then back to her parents, clearly trying to understand the family dynamics at play. "Difficult how?" Caroline asked, her voice carefully neutral. Harold stepped forward, his tone taking on the patient, explanatory quality he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "We've arranged for Lily to be transferred to Presbyterian St. Joseph, where she can receive the kind of specialized care that the Ashford family deserves. Victoria is refusing to authorize the transfer." Caroline's eyebrows rose. "But isn't she in surgery? Shouldn't she stay where the doctors who operated on her can monitor her recovery?" For a moment, I thought Caroline might actually be the voice of reason in this insane situation. But then Evelyn stepped in with her particular brand of manipulation. "Of course that would be ideal under normal circumstances, darling," she said, her voice heavy with implication. "But we have concerns about the quality of care here. This is a public hospital, after all. The staff is overworked, the facilities are outdated, and frankly, they're not accustomed to treating patients from families like ours." Caroline nodded slowly, and I could see her falling into the familiar pattern of deferring to her parents' judgment. "I see. And Victoria disagrees?" "Victoria seems to think that her personal connection to this place somehow makes it superior to Presbyterian," Harold said, his voice dripping with condescension. "She's letting emotion override medical facts." That's when Caroline made her first mistake. She turned to me with what she probably thought was a sympathetic expression and said, "Victoria, I know this must be incredibly stressful for you. Maybe it would be better to let the men handle the medical decisions while you focus on staying strong for Lily?" The casual sexism, combined with the implication that I was too emotional to make rational decisions about my own daughter, hit me like a physical blow. But it was Nathan who responded first. "Caroline, that's not how this works," he said firmly. "Victoria and I make decisions together. We're both Lily's parents." Caroline looked genuinely confused. "Of course, but surely Dad and Dr. Whitfield know more about navigating the medical system? They have experience with these kinds of situations." "What kind of situations?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Well," Caroline said, clearly flustered, "serious medical emergencies involving family members. Important decisions that require expertise." The implication was clear. Serious medical decisions required the kind of expertise that came from being born into the right family, attending the right schools, and moving in the right social circles. It had nothing to do with actual medical knowledge or parental instinct. It was about class, connections, and the assumption that money equaled competence. "Caroline," I said, struggling to keep my voice level, "I run a healthcare consulting business. I work with hospitals across the country. I think I have some expertise in navigating medical systems." She blinked, as if this information was completely new to her despite the fact that Nathan and I had been married for 4 years. "Oh, well, yes, but this is different. This is family. Harold seized on Caroline's arrival as an opportunity to regain control of the situation. Now that Caroline's here, perhaps we can have a rational family discussion about what's best for Lily. Victoria, you're outvoted. The family has decided that Presbyterian St. Joseph is the appropriate choice. Outvoted? I repeated, incredulous. This isn't a democracy, Harold. Lily is my daughter, not a family pet whose care can be decided by committee. Caroline looked back and forth between us, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. Maybe we could compromise? What if we got a second opinion from Presbyterian's doctors? They've already been consulted, Evelyn said quickly. Dr. Harrison has reviewed the case and agrees that immediate transfer is in Lily's best interests. This was news to me. When did that happen? I demanded. While you were indisposed, Harold said dismissively. Dr. Whitfield forwarded Lily's preliminary scans to Dr. Harrison this afternoon. He's standing by to accept the case. I felt the blood drain from my face. They had somehow obtained my daughter's medical records and shared them with doctors at another hospital without my consent. This wasn't just manipulation, it was potentially illegal. You had no right to do that, I said, my voice shaking with rage. Those are confidential medical records. You can't just share them with whoever you want. Caroline stepped forward, her voice taking on that familiar Ashford tone of patient condescension. Victoria, they're family. Of course they have the right to be involved in medical decisions about their granddaughter. No, I said firmly, they don't. Nathan and I are her parents. We're the only ones who have the right to make these decisions. That's when Caroline made her second, far more serious mistake. She turned to Nathan with an expression of genuine confusion and said, Nathan, surely you can see that Victoria isn't thinking clearly right now? She's obviously overwhelmed and making emotional decisions. Maybe it would be better if you took charge of the situation? The waiting room went dead silent. Caroline had just suggested in front of a room full of witnesses that Nathan should override my parental authority because I was too emotional and overwhelmed to be trusted with decisions about our daughter's care. Nathan's face went white with shock and anger. Caroline, what the hell is wrong with you? She stepped back, clearly taken aback by his reaction. I'm just trying to help. I can see that Victoria is upset, and sometimes when people are upset, they don't make the best decisions. Upset? I repeated, my voice rising. My 7-year-old daughter was hit by a car and underwent emergency brain surgery. Of course I'm upset. That doesn't make me incompetent. Harold moved to Caroline's side, his voice taking on that familiar tone of patriarchal authority. Victoria, no one is calling you incompetent. But surely you can see that this situation requires level-headed decision-making. Caroline is simply suggesting that perhaps Nathan, as the man of the family, should take the lead. The casual sexism was breathtaking. They weren't just questioning my judgment. They were arguing that my gender made me fundamentally unsuited to make important decisions during a crisis. Caroline, encouraged by her father's support, pressed on. It's not personal, Victoria, it's just that women tend to be more emotional during these kinds of situations. It's natural. But that's why we have the men to provide stability and rational thinking. I stared at her, finally understanding that Caroline wasn't just going along with her parents' manipulation. She was a true believer in their worldview. She genuinely thought that being born female made me less capable of making decisions about my own child's welfare. Nathan stepped between Caroline and me, his voice cold with fury. Caroline, you need to stop talking, right now. But Caroline wasn't finished. She turned to address the entire group, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering what she believed to be obvious truth. Look, I know this is hard, but we all know Victoria has always been defensive about her place in this family. She's always trying to prove herself, always pushing back against suggestions. Maybe this crisis is an opportunity for her to learn to trust the family's judgment instead of always fighting us. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Caroline had just accused me, in front of a room full of strangers, of being so insecure about my place in the family that I was willing to jeopardize my daughter's medical care to prove a point. It was the cruelest, most calculated insult yet, and it was about to trigger a confrontation that would change everything. Caroline's words still echoed in the suddenly silent waiting room when a new voice cut through the tension like a knife. What exactly is going on here? We all turned to see a tall, distinguished woman in a white coat approaching our group. Her name tag read, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Chief of Staff, and her expression was thunderous. Behind her walked Janet, the head nurse, along with 2 security guards who positioned themselves strategically near the elevators. Dr. Mitchell, Nathan said, relief evident in his voice. I know exactly what you were doing, Dr. Mitchell interrupted, her gaze sweeping across Harold, Evelyn, and Caroline before settling on me. Mrs. Ashford, I understand there's been some confusion about your daughter's care? Harold stepped forward with his usual air of authority. Dr. Mitchell, I'm Harold Ashford. Perhaps you know my family. We've been significant supporters of Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital for decades. There seems to be some resistance to transferring my granddaughter to a more appropriate facility. Dr. Mitchell's expression didn't change. Mr. Ashford, I'm well aware of who you are. I'm also aware that you've been attempting to override the medical decisions of your granddaughter's parents and intimidating my staff. Intimidating? Evelyn said, her voice rising in indignation. We've simply been advocating for the best possible care for our granddaughter. By calling outside administrators to arrange transfers without parental consent? Dr. Mitchell asked coolly. By having your family physician attempt to access confidential medical records? By threatening to report Dr. Reynolds to the hospital board for following proper medical protocols? Caroline looked confused. I don't understand what's wrong with wanting the best care available. Surely. Ms. Ashford, Dr. Mitchell cut her off. What's wrong is that you're not the patient's parents. You have no legal authority to make medical decisions for this child. That's when Harold made the mistake that would change everything. His face flushed with anger, and he stepped closer to Dr. Mitchell, his voice taking on the threatening tone I had heard him use on business calls when people didn't immediately defer to his authority. Dr. Mitchell, I think you're forgetting exactly who you're speaking to. The Ashford family has considerable influence in this city's medical community. Board positions, funding decisions, professional recommendations. We have a long memory when it comes to people who don't show appropriate respect. The security guards shifted slightly, and I saw Dr. Mitchell's jaw tighten. Are you threatening me, Mr. Ashford? I'm explaining reality, Harold replied coldly. Sometimes people in your position need to be reminded of how the world actually works. That's when everything exploded. How the world works, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You want to talk about how the world works, Harold? I stepped forward, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt completely calm. The fear, the exhaustion, the desperate need to keep the peace, all of it evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Let me tell you how the world actually works, I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. My daughter is lying unconscious in the ICU because some careless kid was texting while driving. She almost died today. But instead of supporting her parents through the worst day of our lives, you've spent the last 6 hours trying to prove that you know better than we do about what she needs. Harold opened his mouth to interrupt, but I held up a hand. I'm not finished. You want to talk about influence and board positions and professional recommendations? You want to remind Dr. Mitchell about how funding decisions get made in this city? Dr. Mitchell was watching me with intense curiosity, as if she sensed something important was about to happen. Harold, I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, do you know where you're standing right now? He blinked, clearly confused by the question. I'm standing in Denver General Hospital. That's right, but more specifically, you're standing in the Victoria Ashford Memorial Pediatric Wing. The color drained from Harold's face. Evelyn's mouth fell open. Caroline looked completely lost. "The what?" Caroline whispered. I turned to Dr. Mitchell. "Dr. Mitchell, would you mind explaining to my in-laws exactly what the Victoria Ashford Memorial Wing represents?" Dr. Mitchell's expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching amazement. The Victoria Ashford Memorial Wing is our state-of-the-art pediatric facility, funded by a $25 million donation from Victoria Ashford Healthcare Solutions. It houses our pediatric ICU, our pediatric surgical suites, and our pediatric trauma center. It's named in memory of Ms. Ashford's brother, who died of leukemia as a child. The waiting room had gone dead silent. Other families were staring openly now, sensing that something monumental was happening. $25 million? Caroline breathed. "That's just the initial donation," Dr. Mitchell continued. "Ms. Ashford's foundation has contributed over $40 million to this hospital's pediatric programs over the past 5 years. The surgical equipment that Dr. Reynolds used to save your granddaughter's life today? Donated by Victoria Ashford. The monitoring systems in our ICU? Funded by her foundation. The specialized staff training that gives us one of the best pediatric trauma success rates in the country? Made possible by her ongoing support." Harold was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. You never said—" "You never asked," I replied simply. "You were too busy assuming that because I didn't grow up with money, I couldn't possibly understand how the world works." Evelyn found her voice first. "Why didn't you tell us? All these years, all the arguments about hospitals and medical care, and you never mentioned—" "Mentioned what?" I interrupted. "That I was capable of making informed decisions about healthcare? That my business wasn't just some little hobby but a major player in hospital administration? That maybe, just maybe, I knew what I was talking about when it came to medical facilities?" Caroline sank into a nearby chair, her face pale. "The Memorial Wing? It's named after your brother?" "Aiden," I said softly. "He was 14 when he died. Our family went bankrupt trying to save him. We were treated like charity cases, made to beg for every test, every treatment, every moment of the doctor's time. I swore that no family would ever have to go through what we went through." Dr. Mitchell stepped forward. "The Victoria Ashford Foundation has funded pediatric care for over 3,000 families who couldn't afford treatment. She's personally overseen the implementation of protocols that have saved hundreds of children's lives." Harold's voice was barely a whisper. "We didn't know." "No," I said, my voice gaining steel again. "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask. You were so convinced that I was some kind of social climber who didn't belong in your family, that you never once considered that maybe I had something valuable to contribute." That's when the full weight of their behavior seemed to hit them. They had spent hours insulting the very hospital that their daughter-in-law had built, questioning the competence of doctors she had helped train, and trying to move their granddaughter away from the facility that existed because of her vision and generosity. But Harold, true to form, wasn't ready to concede defeat. "This doesn't change anything," he said, his voice shaking with rage and embarrassment. "Memorial Wing or not, Presbyterian St. Joseph still has better." "Stop!" The word came out like a gunshot. "Just stop." I turned to Dr. Mitchell. "Dr. Mitchell, I want these people removed from the ICU floor. They're not to have any access to my daughter's medical information, and they're not to interfere with her care in any way." "Victoria, you can't be serious," Evelyn said, her voice rising in panic. "We're her grandparents." "You're people who have spent the worst day of my life trying to undermine my authority as a mother," I replied. "You've violated my daughter's medical privacy, threatened hospital staff, and made it clear that you believe your money and connections matter more than her actual welfare." Caroline stood up shakily. "Victoria, please, we were just trying to help." "No," I said firmly, "you were trying to prove that I don't belong in this family. Well, congratulations, you've succeeded. From now on, any contact with Lily goes through Nathan and me. Any decisions about her care are made by Nathan and me. And if any of you try to interfere again, I'll have you banned from this hospital permanently." Harold's face was purple with rage. "You can't do this. We have rights." "Actually," Dr. Mitchell interjected quietly, "she can. As the patient's mother and as the primary benefactor of this facility, Ms. Ashford has every right to restrict access to her daughter's care." That's when Harold made his final, fatal mistake. "This is ridiculous," he snarled, stepping toward me with obvious intent to intimidate. "You ungrateful little—" The security guards moved instantly, stepping between Harold and me, but the damage was done. In front of witnesses, including the chief of staff and multiple hospital employees, Harold Ashford had just demonstrated exactly the kind of person he really was. And as I would soon discover, his moment of exposed cruelty was about to have consequences that none of us could have imagined. The two security guards flanked Harold as he stood frozen, his face a mottled combination of rage and humiliation. The larger of the two guards, whose name tag read Officer James Rodriguez, spoke in the calm, professional tone of someone who had dealt with difficult family situations before. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and lower your voice. This is a hospital, and we have other patients and families who need a peaceful environment." Harold's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to? I could have your job with one phone call." Officer Rodriguez didn't even blink. "Sir, threatening hospital security is grounds for immediate removal from the premises. I'm going to ask you one more time to step back." Dr. Mitchell moved closer to me, her voice low but clear. "Victoria, I need to ask you directly. Do you feel safe with these individuals present?" I looked at Harold's furious face, at Evelyn's calculating expression, at Caroline's shocked confusion. For 4 years, I had walked on eggshells around these people, trying to earn their acceptance, allowing them to make me feel small and inadequate. But now, with my daughter fighting for her life upstairs, I saw them clearly for what they really were. "No," I said firmly, "I don't feel safe. They've been threatening hospital staff, attempting to override medical decisions without parental consent, and now they're trying to intimidate me." Dr. Mitchell nodded and turned to Officer Rodriguez. "Please escort these individuals to the main lobby. They're no longer welcome on the pediatric floors." "You can't do this!" Evelyn shrieked, her composed facade finally cracking completely. "We're her family. We have every right to be here." "Actually, you don't," came a new voice from behind us. We all turned to see a woman in a sharp business suit approaching our group. She was probably in her 40s, with graying hair and the kind of authoritative presence that suggested she was used to being taken seriously. "I'm Linda Chen, Hospital Legal Counsel," she announced, addressing the group but focusing primarily on Harold and Evelyn. "I've been monitoring this situation since we received reports of family members attempting to access confidential medical records without authorization." Caroline stood up shakily. "We're her grandparents. Surely we have some rights." "No, Ms. Ashford, you don't," Linda interrupted firmly. "Under HIPAA regulations, only parents or legal guardians have the right to access a minor's medical information or make decisions about their care. What your family has done today, sharing confidential medical records with outside physicians, attempting to arrange unauthorized transfers, threatening hospital staff, these are serious violations that could result in criminal charges." Harold's face went white. "Criminal charges? That's absurd. We were trying to help our granddaughter." "By violating federal privacy laws," Linda continued. "Dr. Whitfield's access to Lily's medical records was unauthorized. Your sharing of those records with Presbyterian St. Joseph was illegal. Your attempts to arrange a transfer without parental consent constitute interference with medical care." The waiting room had emptied as other families, sensing the escalating drama, had quietly moved to different areas. Only hospital staff and the Ashford family remained in what had become a very public reckoning. Nathan, who had been silent during the revelation about my donations and the memorial wing, finally found his voice. "Mom, Dad, Caroline, you need to leave, now. Evelyn turned to her son with desperation in her eyes. Nathan, surely you can see that Victoria is being unreasonable. She's using this tragedy to drive a wedge between us. Stop, Nathan said, his voice cutting through her words like ice. Just stop. I've watched you spend the worst day of our lives trying to prove that my wife isn't capable of making decisions about our daughter's care. I've listened to you insult the hospital that saved Lily's life. I've watched you treat the woman I love like she's some kind of incompetent child who needs your guidance. He stepped closer to his parents, and I could see years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. Do you want to know what's really unreasonable? He continued. The fact that my wife, who has built a multi-million-dollar business, who has donated more money to children's health care than our family will see in a lifetime, who has literally saved thousands of children's lives, has spent 4 years trying to earn your approval while you treated her like garbage. Caroline tried to interrupt. Nathan, that's not fair. We never. You never what? Nathan turned on his sister. You never suggested that men should make medical decisions because women are too emotional? You never implied that Victoria's background made her unsuitable for our family? You never treated her like an outsider who needed to prove herself worthy of the Ashford name? Officer Rodriguez stepped forward again. Folks, we need to wrap this up. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford. Ms. Ashford. You're being asked to leave the premises. If you refuse, you'll be arrested for trespassing. That's when Harold made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. He pulled out his phone and began dialing. I'm calling my lawyer, he announced. This is harassment, and we won't stand for it. Linda Chen smiled grimly. Please do. I'd be very interested to hear your lawyer's opinion on federal privacy violations and interference with medical care. I'm sure the district attorney would be interested as well. Dr. Mitchell added, I should also mention that this entire incident has been recorded by our security cameras. The threats, the intimidation, the attempts to override parental authority, it's all documented. Harold's phone call was apparently not going as planned. I could hear a voice on the other end that sounded distinctly less supportive than he had expected. What do you mean, not advisable? Harold was saying into the phone. We're talking about family rights here. What federal violations? Since when is trying to help your granddaughter a crime? Evelyn sank into a chair, the full scope of their situation apparently beginning to dawn on her. This is insane, she whispered. We were just trying to make sure Lily got the best care possible. No, I said, my voice calm but firm. You were trying to prove that money and connections matter more than medical expertise and parental authority. You were trying to teach my daughter that her mother's judgment doesn't matter, that wealthy grandparents always know better than working mothers. Linda Chen stepped forward with a clipboard. Mrs. Ashford, I need you to sign this official restriction order. It formally bars Harold, Evelyn, and Caroline Ashford from accessing any information about your daughter's medical care and prohibits them from entering the pediatric floors without your explicit written permission. I took the pen without hesitation and signed my name. What happens now? Now they leave, Officer Rodriguez said simply. And if they return without permission, they'll be arrested for violating a hospital restriction order. Harold ended his phone call, his face ashen. Whatever his lawyer had told him, it clearly wasn't what he wanted to hear. This isn't over, he said, his voice lacking its earlier authority. Yes, it is, Dr. Mitchell replied. It's very much over. You've been banned from this hospital's pediatric facilities. Any attempt to contact Dr. Reynolds or her team will be reported to the medical board. Any further interference with this family's medical decisions will result in criminal charges. That's when the most unexpected person spoke up. Caroline, who had been silent since the revelation about my donations, stood up slowly. Victoria, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea. About your brother, about the foundation, about any of it. I looked at her, seeing something I had never seen before. Genuine remorse. We thought, She continued, struggling with the words. We thought you didn't understand how things worked in our world. We thought we were helping. Your world, I repeated. Caroline, my world is saving children's lives. My world is making sure that families don't have to choose between medical care and financial survival. What exactly did you think your world was about? She couldn't answer, because the answer was too ugly to say out loud. Their world was about maintaining social hierarchies, about using money and connections to ensure that people like them always got preferential treatment, about believing that breeding and bloodlines mattered more than character or competence. Officer Rodriguez gestured toward the elevators. Time to go, folks. As Harold, Evelyn, and Caroline were escorted toward the lobby, I heard Harold mutter something under his breath about ungrateful and consequences. But his threats rang hollow now. The man who had spent hours trying to intimidate hospital staff and override parental authority was being walked out by security guards like a common troublemaker. Dr. Mitchell turned to Nathan and me as the elevator doors closed behind them. I want to personally apologize for what you've been put through today. No family should have to deal with that kind of interference during a medical crisis. Nathan shook his head. You have nothing to apologize for. If anything, we should be thanking you for handling the situation so professionally. Actually, Dr. Mitchell said, there's something else we need to discuss. The medical record violations that occurred today were required to report them to the appropriate authorities. There may be an investigation. I nodded. I understand. Do whatever you need to do. As Dr. Mitchell and Linda Chen walked away to begin documenting the incident, Nathan and I were finally alone in the waiting room. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and regret. Victoria, he said quietly, I am so sorry, for all of it, for not standing up to them sooner, for letting them treat you the way they did, for not seeing what was right in front of me. I took his hand, feeling some of the tension leave my body for the first time all day. We'll deal with all of that later. Right now, let's go see our daughter. As we walked toward the elevators that would take us to the ICU, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. The people who had spent years trying to make me feel like an outsider in my own family were gone. The questions about my worthiness, my judgment, my place in the Ashford hierarchy, all of it had been swept away in a single afternoon. But more importantly, my daughter was alive, and she was about to wake up in a hospital wing that bore my name, surrounded by equipment that I had provided, cared for by doctors whose training I had funded. Justice, it turned out, had been there all along. I just hadn't realized I was standing in it. The pediatric ICU was a sanctuary of soft beeps and gentle lighting, a stark contrast to the chaos we had just left behind in the waiting room. Lily lay in the center bed, looking impossibly small, surrounded by monitors and IV lines, but her chest rose and fell with steady rhythm. Her dark hair was partially shaved, where Dr. Reynolds had operated, and a large bandage covered the surgical site, but her face was peaceful. She looked so tiny, Nathan whispered, his voice breaking as he approached her bedside. I moved to the other side of the bed, careful not to disturb any of the equipment, as I reached for Lily's small hand. Her skin was warm, and I could feel the strong pulse in her wrist, signs of life that I had been desperate to confirm since that terrible phone call hours ago. Hi, baby, I said softly, stroking her fingers. Mommy and Daddy are here. You're safe now. Dr. Reynolds appeared beside us, her scrubs replaced by a clean white coat. The surgery went even better than I hoped, she said quietly. We were able to relieve all the pressure on her brain and repair the bleeding without any complications. Her vital signs have been stable for the past 2 hours. When will she wake up? Nathan asked, his eyes never leaving Lily's face. It could be anywhere from a few hours to tomorrow morning. Every patient responds differently to anesthesia, especially children who've experienced trauma. But all her responses are exactly what we want to see. Dr. Reynolds checked Lily's chart, making notes as she spoke. I have to say, I'm glad we didn't have to deal with any more interference from your family. That was Unprecedented. I sank into the chair beside Lily's bed, suddenly feeling the full weight of the day's events. I'm sorry you had to witness all of that. It's not how I wanted Lily's medical team to meet her grandparents. Victoria, Dr. Reynolds said gently, you have nothing to apologize for. What happened down there was completely inappropriate. No parent should have to fight their own family members while their child is in crisis. Over the next hour, nurses came and went, checking Lily's vital signs and adjusting her medications. Each time, they treated Nathan and me with the kind of respect and care that made it clear word had already spread about what had happened downstairs. We weren't just worried parents anymore. We were the family that the hospital's most important benefactor had fought to protect. It was nearly midnight when Linda Chen, the hospital's legal counsel, knocked softly on the ICU door. She entered quietly, clearly mindful of the peaceful environment. I'm sorry to disturb you, she said, but there are some legal matters we need to discuss. The district attorney's office has been notified about the HIPAA violations, and they'll likely want to speak with you both tomorrow. Nathan looked up from where he'd been holding Lily's hand. What exactly are they looking at? Linda pulled out a thick folder, several potential charges. Unauthorized access to medical records is a federal crime. Dr. Whitfield could lose his medical license for sharing confidential patient information without consent. The sharing of those records with Presbyterian St. Joseph constitutes a separate violation. And Harold and Evelyn? I asked. Conspiracy to interfere with medical care, intimidation of hospital staff, and potentially criminal harassment. The security footage from today shows Harold explicitly threatening Dr. Mitchell and attempting to physically intimidate you. That's assault, even if no physical contact was made. I felt a grim satisfaction at the news. For years, Harold and Evelyn had used their wealth and connections to intimidate people who couldn't fight back. Now they were facing the consequences of targeting someone who could. There's more, Linda continued. The medical board has opened an investigation into Dr. Whitfield's conduct. Sharing patient records with unauthorized parties is grounds for immediate license suspension. Nathan shook his head in disbelief. They destroyed their own family doctor's career over this? They destroyed a lot more than that, I said quietly. They showed Lily exactly what kind of people they really are. Even if she was unconscious, she'll hear about this eventually. She'll know that when she needed their support most, they chose to attack her mother instead. Linda made some notes in her file. The DA will want statements from both of you about the threats and intimidation. They'll also want to understand the full scope of your relationship with this hospital, Victoria. Your philanthropic work gives additional weight to the harassment charges. Whatever they need, I said firmly. I want these people held accountable for what they did today. After Linda left, Nathan and I settled into the uncomfortable chairs beside Lily's bed for what we knew would be a long night. The ICU never truly slept. Nurses padded quietly between rooms. Monitors beeped softly, and the occasional alarm required quick interventions somewhere down the hall. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. This is Caroline. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know that I'm horrified by what happened today. I had no idea about your brother or the foundation. I feel sick about the things I said. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that some of us see how wrong we were. I showed the message to Nathan, who read it with a frown. What do you think? I think Caroline is trying to distance herself from her parents now that she realizes the full scope of what they've done, I said. But it's too little, too late. Nathan nodded sadly. She's always been a follower. Whatever Mom and Dad believed, she believed. I don't think she's ever had an independent thought about anything important. That's not an excuse for what she said today, I replied. Suggesting that you should override my parental authority because I'm too emotional? That wasn't following. That was actively participating in their attempt to undermine me. Around 4 a.m., Lily's fingers moved slightly in mine. I sat up straighter, watching her face for any signs of consciousness. Her eyelids fluttered, and she made a small sound deep in her throat. Nathan, I whispered urgently, I think she's waking up." He was beside me instantly, both of us leaning over Lily as her eyes slowly opened. She blinked several times, clearly disoriented and struggling to focus. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here, baby," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Daddy's here too. You're in the hospital, but you're going to be okay." Lily tried to lift her head, but I gently pressed her back against the pillow. "Don't move too much, sweetheart. You had surgery to fix a bump on your head." "It hurts," she said, reaching up to touch the bandage. "I know it does. The doctors gave you medicine to help with the pain." I pressed the call button to alert the nurses that she was awake. Dr. Reynolds arrived within minutes, still looking fresh and alert despite the late hour. "Hello, Lily," she said cheerfully. "I'm Dr. Reynolds. How are you feeling?" "Tired," Lily said, "and my head hurts. Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" Nathan and I exchanged glances. This was a conversation we would need to have eventually, but not now, not when she was still recovering from surgery. "They had to go home," Nathan said simply. "But Mommy and Daddy are staying right here with you." Dr. Reynolds conducted a quick neurological exam, checking Lily's reflexes, pupil response, and cognitive function. Everything looked normal, which was the best news we could have hoped for. "She's going to need to stay in the ICU for at least another day," Dr. Reynolds explained. "We want to monitor her closely for any signs of complications. But her responses are excellent, and I'm very optimistic about her recovery." As dawn broke over Denver, casting soft light through the ICU windows, I realized that we had survived the worst day of our lives. Lily was awake and responding normally. The people who had tried to turn our family crisis into an opportunity for control had been exposed and removed, and Nathan and I had emerged stronger and more united than we had ever been. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. The legal proceedings would take months to resolve. The family relationships that had been shattered yesterday would never be the same. And most importantly, Nathan and I would need to figure out how to explain to our 7-year-old daughter why her grandparents weren't welcome in her life anymore. The hardest conversations were still ahead of us, but for the first time in years, I felt confident that Nathan and I would face them together, as equal partners in protecting the family we had built. Outside our window, the city was waking up to a new day, and so were we. 3 weeks later, I sat in the Denver County Courthouse wearing my best charcoal suit, my hands folded calmly in my lap as I watched Harold, Evelyn, and Caroline enter the courtroom with their legal team. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the formal setting and the weight of the charges against them. Dr. Whitfield was notably absent. He had already reached a plea agreement with the district attorney's office that would cost him his medical license and result in substantial fines. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Martinez was a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor who had built her reputation on holding wealthy defendants accountable for their crimes. She had spent the past 3 weeks building an airtight case against the Ashfords, and her confidence was evident as she arranged her files at the prosecution table. "Your Honor," ADA Martinez began as the hearing commenced, "we are here today because 3 individuals believed that their family name and financial status gave them the right to violate federal privacy laws, intimidate hospital staff, and interfere with the medical care of a critically injured child." Judge Patricia Hoffman, a stern woman in her 60s who was known for her intolerance of entitled behavior, listened carefully as the prosecution outlined the charges. Multiple counts of HIPAA violations, conspiracy to interfere with medical care, intimidation of healthcare workers, and criminal harassment. "The evidence will show," Martinez continued, "that Harold, Evelyn, and Caroline Ashford engaged in a systematic campaign to override the parental authority of Victoria and Nathan Ashford regarding their 7-year-old daughter's emergency medical treatment. This campaign included illegal sharing of confidential medical records, attempts to arrange unauthorized hospital transfers, and explicit threats against hospital staff who refused to comply with their demands." The defense attorney, an expensive-looking man named Richard Sterling who specialized in representing wealthy clients, stood to present his opening statement. He painted a picture of concerned grandparents who were simply trying to ensure their granddaughter received the best possible care. Your Honor, my clients were acting out of love and genuine concern for their granddaughter's welfare. They believed, in good faith, that she would receive superior care at a different facility. Their actions, while perhaps misguided, were motivated by family loyalty, not criminal intent. Judge Hoffman's expression suggested she was unimpressed by this line of defense. Mr. Sterling, ignorance of federal privacy laws is not a valid defense for violating them. Proceed with your evidence. The prosecution's case was devastating in its thoroughness. Security footage from the hospital showed Harold explicitly threatening Dr. Mitchell and attempting to intimidate me. Audio recordings captured Evelyn's demands to override parental decisions and Caroline's suggestions that Nathan should assume medical decision-making authority because women were too emotional during crises. When Linda Chen, the hospital's legal counsel, took the stand, she methodically documented each violation of protocol and federal law. The defendant's actions created an environment of chaos and intimidation during a pediatric medical emergency. Hospital staff reported feeling threatened and unable to focus on patient care due to the aggressive behavior of the defendants. Dr. Reynolds testified about the medical disruption caused by the Ashfords' interference. I've been performing pediatric neurosurgery for 15 years, and I have never encountered a situation where family members so aggressively attempted to undermine medical protocols while a child was fighting for her life. Their behavior was not only inappropriate, it was dangerous to the patient. But it was the testimony from other hospital witnesses that proved most damaging to the defense. Nurse Janet, who had been working the pediatric floor for over 20 years, described Harold's threats in detail. He told me that the Ashford family had, quote, influence in the medical community and that people who didn't show appropriate respect would face consequences. I've never felt threatened by a family member in all my years of nursing. The prosecution also presented evidence of the illegal medical record sharing. Dr. Whitfield had already admitted to federal investigators that he had accessed Lily's confidential records without authorization and shared them with physicians at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital. This wasn't a simple case of grandparents seeking a second opinion, Ada Martinez explained to the court. This was a deliberate attempt to circumvent legal protections for patient privacy in order to force a medical decision that the parents had explicitly rejected. When it came time for the defense to present their case, Sterling called character witnesses who testified to the Ashfords' philanthropy and community involvement. But under cross-examination, Martinez effectively demonstrated that their charitable giving was primarily motivated by tax benefits and social climbing, rather than genuine concern for others. The most damaging moment for the defense came when Sterling called Caroline to testify on her own behalf. Under direct examination, she tearfully described her love for Lily and her genuine belief that they were trying to help. But Martinez's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. Ms. Ashford, you testified that you believed you were acting in Lily's best interests. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. And you believed that Presbyterian St. Joseph would provide better care than Denver General Hospital? Yes, based on what my parents told me. Were you aware that Denver General's Pediatric Trauma Center has better success rates for traumatic brain injuries than Presbyterian St. Joseph? Caroline hesitated. No, I wasn't aware of that. Were you aware that the surgical equipment used to save your niece's life was donated by her mother? Not at the time, no. Were you aware that Victoria Ashford has donated over $40 million to pediatric healthcare initiatives? I learned that later. So you were making recommendations about your niece's medical care without any actual knowledge of the facility's success rates or quality of care involved. I was trusting my parents' judgment. And when you suggested that Nathan should override Victoria's parental authority because women are, quote, too emotional during medical crises, was that also based on your parents' judgment? Caroline's face flushed red. I was just trying to help. Help by suggesting that a mother had no right to make medical decisions for her own child? That's not what I meant. Ms. Ashford, isn't it true that you and your parents were more concerned with maintaining control over family decisions than with your niece's actual welfare? The defense objected, but the damage was done. Caroline's testimony had revealed the fundamental selfishness and ignorance that had motivated their actions. When I took the stand, I spoke calmly and factually about the events of that terrible day. I described the years of subtle undermining and condescension that had led up to the hospital confrontation. I explained my work in healthcare administration and my personal commitment to ensuring that all children receive quality medical care regardless of their family's financial status. The defendants didn't just violate federal privacy laws, I testified. They used my daughter's medical crisis as an opportunity to assert dominance over our family. They were more concerned with proving that they knew better than the medical experts and the child's own parents than they were with her actual welfare. Under cross-examination, Sterling tried to paint me as vindictive and unforgiving. Mrs. Ashford, isn't it true that you're using this legal proceeding to punish your in-laws for years of perceived slights? No, Mr. Sterling. I'm using this legal proceeding to ensure that what happened to my family doesn't happen to other families. When people believe their wealth and connections put them above the law, they need to face consequences. But surely you could have resolved this within the family. There was nothing to resolve. They broke federal laws, threatened hospital staff, and attempted to override parental authority during a medical emergency. These aren't family disputes, they're crimes. The prosecution's closing argument was powerful and straightforward. Ada Martinez outlined each crime methodically, emphasizing that wealth and family status do not exempt anyone from following the law. The defendants want you to believe that their violations of federal privacy laws were motivated by love and concern, but the evidence shows something very different. It shows a pattern of entitlement, control, and disregard for the rights of others. They believed that their money and connections gave them the right to override medical decisions, intimidate healthcare workers, and violate their own granddaughter's privacy. The defense's closing argument focused on the defendants' good intentions and their lack of criminal history. These are people who made mistakes during an extremely stressful family crisis. They deserve compassion, not criminal prosecution. Judge Hoffman deliberated for less than an hour before returning to deliver her verdict. Her voice was firm and uncompromising as she addressed the defendants. The evidence in this case is overwhelming. You violated federal privacy laws, intimidated healthcare workers, and attempted to interfere with medical care during a pediatric emergency. Your actions were not motivated by love or concern. They were motivated by a belief that your wealth and social status placed you above the law. Harold was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison and 2 years of probation, plus substantial fines. Evelyn received 4 months in prison and 18 months of probation. Caroline, as a first-time offender who had shown genuine remorse, received 1 year of community service and probation, but no jail time. I want to be clear, Judge Hoffman continued, that this court will not tolerate attempts to use wealth and privilege to circumvent legal protections for patient privacy and parental rights. Your behavior was not only illegal, it was morally reprehensible. As the gavel fell and the defendants were led away to begin processing for their sentences, I felt a profound sense of closure. This wasn't about revenge or family feuds. It was about accountability and justice. Nathan squeezed my hand as we left the courthouse. "It's over," he said quietly. "No," I replied, thinking about Lily waiting for us at home, fully recovered and eager to show us her latest art project. "It's just beginning." We had built something stronger from the ashes of that terrible day, a family based on mutual respect, trust, and genuine love rather than obligation and hierarchy. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 1 year later, I stood in the exact spot where everything had changed, the waiting room of the Victoria Ashford Memorial Pediatric Wing at Denver General Hospital. But this time, I wasn't there as a desperate mother fighting for my daughter's life. I was there for the annual commemoration of Aiden's birthday, something I had done privately every year since his death. But this year felt different. This year, I wasn't alone. Lily skipped beside me, her dark hair bouncing as she clutched a small bouquet of sunflowers, Aiden's favorite flowers, according to the stories I had shared with her about her uncle she would never meet. Her surgical scar had faded to a thin silver line that was barely visible unless you knew where to look, but more importantly, she showed no signs of the traumatic brain injury that had nearly taken her from us. Dr. Reynolds had declared her recovery nothing short of miraculous. "Mommy, tell me again about Uncle Aiden," Lily said as we walked toward the memorial plaque that bore his name and photograph. "Uncle Aiden was the bravest person I ever knew," I said, the words coming easier now after a year of sharing these stories with my daughter. "He was sick for a long time, but he never stopped smiling. He never stopped believing that tomorrow would be better than today." Nathan walked beside us, carrying a small watering can for the memorial garden that the hospital had created in the courtyard. Over the past year, he had thrown himself into understanding the foundation's work, attending board meetings and site visits, learning about the families we helped, and the children whose lives we had saved. It had become our shared mission rather than just mine. As we approached the memorial wall, I saw Dr. Reynolds waiting for us with a warm smile. She had become more than just Lily's neurosurgeon over the past year. She had become a friend and ally in our foundation work. "Happy birthday, Aiden," Dr. Reynolds said softly as Lily placed the sunflowers at the base of his memorial plaque. "His sister has saved 43 more children this year in his honor." Lily looked up at me with wide eyes. 43? Really? "Really," I confirmed. 43 families who didn't have to choose between their child's medical care and their financial survival. The transformation in our family had been profound. Without the constant tension and criticism from Harold, Evelyn, and Caroline, our home had become a place of genuine peace and joy. Nathan had finally relaxed into the husband and father he had always wanted to be, no longer torn between loyalty to his birth family and his chosen family. Harold had served his full 6 months in federal prison, followed by his probation period. The experience had apparently broken something fundamental in him. According to mutual acquaintances, he had become a shadow of his former imperious self. Evelyn had emerged from her 4-month sentence bitter and isolated, having lost most of her social connections when news of the criminal convictions spread through Denver's society circles. Caroline had completed her community service at a children's shelter, an irony that wasn't lost on me. She had sent several letters over the past year, each one attempting to rebuild some kind of relationship with Nathan and me. The letters had grown more thoughtful and self-aware over time, suggesting that her experience had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself and her family. The most recent letter had arrived just last week. In it, Caroline wrote, "I understand now that I spent my entire life accepting my parents' view of the world without ever questioning whether it was right or fair or kind. I let them teach me that money and breeding mattered more than character and compassion. I'm ashamed of the person I was that day in the hospital, and I'm trying to become someone better." Nathan had asked me several times whether I thought we should respond to her letters, perhaps allow her to rebuild a relationship with Lily. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet, but I could feel my anger toward Carolyn softening in ways that my feelings toward Harold and Evelyn never would. The difference, I had explained to Nathan, is that Caroline seems genuinely horrified by her behavior. Harold and Evelyn are only sorry they got caught. Dr. Reynolds walked with us toward the pediatric ICU, where we planned to visit some of the current patients and their families. It had become a monthly tradition. Lily and I would bring art supplies and books, spending time with children who were facing the same kind of medical crisis that had brought us here a year ago. "There's something I wanted to tell you," Dr. Reynolds said as we walked. "The hospital board has approved the expansion of the memorial wing. We're adding a new research facility focused on pediatric trauma recovery. It will be called the Aiden Ashford Research Center." I stopped walking, overcome by the magnitude of what she was saying. A research center in my brother's name, dedicated to helping children recover from the kind of traumatic injuries that Lily had survived. The research that comes out of that center could help thousands of children, Dr. Reynolds continued. It's exactly what Aiden would have wanted his legacy to be. Lily tugged on my hand. Mommy, are you crying? Happy tears, baby, I said, wiping my eyes. Uncle Aiden would be so proud. As we entered the ICU, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. A year ago, I had been fighting for my daughter's life, while simultaneously defending my right to make decisions about her care. I had been forced to choose between keeping the peace with my in-laws and protecting my family's welfare. The choice, in the end, had been easy, but the consequences had been more far-reaching than I could have imagined. The legal proceedings had made headlines throughout Colorado, sparking conversations about family dynamics, patient rights, and the way wealth and privilege could be used to intimidate those with less power. Several other families had come forward with their own stories of being bullied by wealthy relatives during medical crises, leading to new hospital protocols designed to protect patients and families from this kind of interference. Nathan's architecture firm had actually benefited from the publicity. His principled stand in support of his wife and daughter had earned him respect in the professional community, leading to new contracts and partnerships. He had recently been approached about designing a new children's hospital in Phoenix, a project that would combine his architectural expertise with my healthcare administration knowledge. As we spent the afternoon with current patients and their families, I was struck by how different these interactions felt compared to a year ago. Then, I had been driven by guilt and obligation, trying to honor my brother's memory through financial contributions, while keeping my philanthropy separate from my personal life. Now this work felt integrated into who we were as a family. Lily understood that helping sick children was part of our family's purpose. Nathan saw the direct impact of our foundation's work and felt personally invested in its success. We had become partners in the truest sense, united not just by love but by shared values and common goals. That evening, as we drove home through the Denver suburbs, Lily fell asleep in her car seat, exhausted from our day at the hospital. Nathan reached over to squeeze my hand as we sat at a red light. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret the confrontation that had shattered his family? Did I regret the legal proceedings that had sent his parents to prison? Did I regret the permanent estrangement from people who had shared our lives for 4 years? No, I said finally. I regret that it took a crisis for us to see them clearly. I regret that Lily had to experience that kind of family dysfunction during the worst day of her life. But I don't regret standing up for what was right. The light turned green, and we continued toward home, a place that had truly become a sanctuary over the past year. We had redecorated after the trial, removing the formal family photos that had included Harold, Evelyn, and Caroline, replacing them with pictures of our small family and images from our foundation work. I got a call from the district attorney's office today, Nathan said as we pulled into our driveway. Harold and Evelyn's probation is up next month. They'll have completed their sentences. Good for them, I said, meaning it. I hope they've learned something from the experience. Do you think they'll try to make contact? I considered this as we gathered our things from the car and gently woke Lily. I think Harold's pride will keep him away. He'll never forgive me for exposing him as ordinary and powerless. Evelyn might try eventually, but only if she thinks there's something to gain. As we tucked Lily into bed that night, she looked up at me with serious eyes. Mommy, will I ever meet Grandpa Harold and Grandma Evelyn again? It was a question we had known was coming. Lily remembered them, of course, and had asked several times over the past year why they never visited anymore. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love. When that happens, families have to protect themselves. Like how you protected me at the hospital. Exactly like that. Lily nodded solemnly. I'm glad you protected me, Mommy. As Nathan and I sat in our living room later that evening, sharing a quiet glass of wine and planning the next day's foundation meetings, I realized that we had accomplished something I had never thought possible. We had built a family based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine partnership rather than obligation and hierarchy. The Ashfords had tried to use my daughter's medical crisis to establish their dominance over our family once and for all. Instead, they had given me the opportunity to show exactly what I was made of and what I was willing to fight for. A year later, Lily was thriving, our marriage was stronger than ever, and our foundation was saving more children's lives than I had ever dreamed possible. The people who had spent years trying to make me feel like an outsider in my own family were gone, replaced by genuine relationships built on respect and understanding. My story didn't end with betrayal and trauma, it began with resilience and transformation, and this time, I was the one writing it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.